I like calling the Sunday Talks conversations. Even though it might seem like there's not much of a conversation going on, there really is, isn't there? Like before you come on a Sunday morning, you have conversations going on. And as you arrive here and you have your practice, there are conversations going on, right? And you know that dolphins can hear sounds we can't hear, right? Even kids can hear tones that we can't hear, right? So there is a conversation going on all of the time. And we come together in this spiritual community with this sangha, with this practice, to have that conversation, to have it with each other. One thing you don't hear a lot of in unity, I think, is a practice of devotion, a devotional spiritual practice, right? Like if any of you are into yoga or other spiritual practices, a lot of people in unity have done a lot of exploring, but there is a devotional aspect to spiritual practice that we don't talk about a lot in unity. What does that make you think when you hear a devotional practice? What does it make you think of? The daily word. Okay, yeah, that's good. The daily word's a devotional. Discipline, commitment. Catholicism. Oh, good. Now you're going on my train of thought here. Does it sometimes make you think of an outside God that you're supposed to worship, or, that if you are a good enough little girl, then good things will happen? The Santa God a little bit for some of us. The devotional practice. Another thing you don't hear a lot about in unity is God's will. Right? What is God's will for you? Let me follow God's will. Now, some of you might have that as part of your personal spiritual practice, but you don't hear a lot about saying you need to follow God's will. Who is this God you speak of? Is it the Santa God? What is God's will? You don't hear a lot in unity about, well, you do hear a lot about surrender, don't you? But it's kind of like a non-resistant surrender, right? Rather than, let me give myself to something outside of me or some power, some higher power, right? Old school is to say, jack it to Jesus. Let me jack it to Jesus. I actually really like that. When things are getting really bad, you go, you know what? Jack it to Jesus. Let me give it to God. But you do hear a lot of God can do no more to me than God can do through me. You hear a lot in unity of a oneness philosophy, right? A philosophy that more reflects nature, ecosystems, that more reflects kind of quantum physics and consciousness, right? That more reflects these things that are less tied into traditional religion and dogma and books and scripture and being told what to do or how to do it from someone that got it themselves, and more about your union with the divine, even using the word union being faulty and being less than, because how could you have a union unless you're implying you have separate things, right? So the word union even being just slightly missing the mark. Because if you truly get into a space of non-duality in your mind and in your spiritual practice, there is only one. There is only oneness. So then, is there a space for a surrender practice, for a devotional practice, for an understanding of God's will? Interesting topic for today, yeah? What do you think? Have you thought about it? Have you ever felt like you're knocking your head against a cosmic 2x4? trying to figure out what God's will is, or trying to figure out in whatever way you frame it, in whatever way you term it, if you know God is good and God is love and all of these things, then it's like sometimes you hit up against a cosmic 2x4 in life going, what am I doing wrong then? All of my intention is here. I am trying to step into the flow of life. I am trying to be of the Most High. I am trying to live the life that I know that my source, the source of my being, intends for me. But I'm hitting my head against the cosmic 2x4. Or something seems to be hijacking my time, my mind, my money, my life. You fill in the blank. Something seems to be pulling me into a direction where I'm hitting resistance or where things aren't going well. And maybe we try to have that practice where we say it's all in God's hands. But then you think of the words of Teresa of Avila saying God has no hands on earth but yours. No eyes through which to see, no heart to hear, to feel. That yours are the hands of God in expression. So then what is that? How do we step into both trusting in a moment it's all God, it's all good, but then also take on the practice of recognizing that God can do no more to you than God can do through you. God can do no more to us as a society, as a culture, as a planet, as a person, than God can do through us. Charles Fillmore wrote about this in one of his lessons, and it's the lesson on 2 of the 12 powers being will and understanding. Will and understanding, so divine will and spiritual understanding. And he said they're both kind of located in that head brain area, but they bounce back and forth. It's like the part, he was very scientific, Charles Fillmore, Unity's co-founder, and he was like, I mean, he would love quantum physics and everything that's going on with science right now. But he said it's not just a specific exact location. It's like a bouncing back and forth. It's almost like we could say they're twins, will and understanding, like they're twins. That they need to be developed and expressed together in synchronicity. That they really are of one energy when we express them rightly. So when we feel like we're getting hit upside the head with the cosmic 2x4, is it possible that we are getting out of oneness and into the realm of duality, expressing our own will? Is it possible that you have your own will? Has anyone ever prayed for something and you're ready? Like when you're at your place of surrender, you've like let it all go and you're praying, Spirit, show me. I trust that in this moment I am listening, I am watching. I know I am so clear and I am so grounded in my practice that as I say this, as I approach this, whatever XYZ you fill it in the blank in your life, you go, I'm here, I'm grounded, I'm listening. And then something happens that you don't like. It's not how you wanted it to go. It's not the answer you wanted. It's not the experience you wanted. It's not the person you wanted. It's not whatever it is that you wanted. And then what do we tend to do? Let me just pray that again. Let me just, wait a second. I don't think that's, I couldn't just have to let go of this now. Let me just try this way and let me just pray it again, just like this. Now I'm listening. Here we go. I'm listening. Now let me just launch this one again. No, not what I'm looking for. Not what I'm looking for. Not what I'm looking for. But here, now, ouch, that hurt. Here I come back a month later. Let me just surrender again. Now I'm listening. Nope, that's not the answer. That I'm not ready to let go yet. Oh, baggage, that baggage? No, I'm carrying that with me. And let's just figure out how this baggage can become beautiful. because this backpack is not leaving my shoulders. Godness. I'm not going to give that up. I'm not going to heal that. I'm not going to move forward. I'm not going to let go. My will, God's will. Such a concept. We know in traditional Christianity, there's very much a concept, right? And there are very, very, very oftentimes people who can tell you which one is which. Can tell you exactly what God's will is for your life. Sometimes even down to the details of your most intimate life choices. And they're very clear on that. Very, very clear on that. But what if we're not willing to surrender to human will and human ego, to the errors of mind, to the errors of individual identities that seek their own agendas, right? What if we're not willing even to surrender to that in ourselves? Like, what if I lived a life where I'm like, I'm no longer even willing to surrender to the will of this Erin woman that's here in this time and space and who thinks she knows what she wants or thinks she knows how to get it or thinks she knows how the world should be. What if even that, I want to break through that portal? Then where do I arrive? I think then I arrive at the place where I surrender to divine will. And I recognize that there is one will. There is truly one will. It's the power of will itself. And I am not separate from that will. It is not separate from my highest good. It is not separate from God. It's not separate from the expression of me, Erin. But there is oneness. There is one. And when I step into that space, I step into that practice, I step into a portal. We've all heard the idea that we're created with free will. Do we believe that? Free will. It's a philosophical idea. So we have free will, but there can be two paths. We can go down the path of what I think is being my will, or I can go down the path of what I think of being God's will. And boy, the whole thing can be pretty darn confusing, can't it, when you look at it like that? So I think in spiritual practice, one of the things that dissipates the confusion is affirming into saying to yourself, to our own being, to the core of our being, there is one will. It is God's will. It is my will now. There is only oneness. There is no possibility, no way for me to be separate from this will. This will is the activity of love in expression. That is my highest. So when we think we are being hit upside the head by the cosmic 2x4, we're praying, but we're not getting the answers we want, and we're not feeling like we're in the flow of life, it doesn't feel good. Why doesn't it feel good? It feels like, unlike harmony, it feels like discord, and it's painful because we're not created to live in that. We're created to live, move, and have our being in harmony. Now, that doesn't mean the absence of difficulty for the human condition. But it means to be in the flow of life, to be an inlet and an outlet of all that is God. In Matthew 7:6-7, it says, "Cast not pearls before swine. Do not give what is holy to the dogs, nor cast your pearls before swine, lest they trample them under their feet and turn and tear you in pieces." Ooh. We can think of that traditionally as being not to waste good things on people who won't appreciate them, or not to preach, not to try to teach people that don't have receptive hearts and minds. But we can also look at it differently. We can look at it in a different way. Don't cast pearls before swine, Don't invest my time, my energy, my mind, my resources, my will. Don't invest my independent individual power of free will in anything that doesn't honor it, anything that is not holy. Don't cast it before swine. Cast it before the divine. That wasn't supposed to rhyme. What a terrible rhyme. Like that could be a meme. Don't cast it before swine. Cast it before the divine. But would you take, if you had $50,000 right now and you had that in your savings account, would you take that and toss it into an investment account? Would you do that? Can you answer that question yet? I hope not. Can you toss it into an investment account that you've researched? Yes? I hope not yet. Can you toss it into an investment account that you've researched and it looks like it has good returns, and to the best of your ability, seeking with all your heart and your mind, you've looked at everything and you think, this feels like I'm getting a yes. Can you toss it into that one? Yeah. But would you put it in something without researching it? That's what Charles Fillmore called going to headquarters. Going to headquarters. And when we do that, we take this power of free will and we yoke it to divine will. Knowing that in truth, these are all just words to try to describe a very mystical spiritual process that does not know two, right? That only knows one. And when we do that, we come into our fullness of our I am nature. When we do that, we come into surrender, we come into devotion, and we come into one will. And it is magnified and it is multiplied. And we begin to have a sense that we are one with the flow of life. That we're not casting our pearls before swine. That we're checking out our investment. But it's ours to choose. It's ours to choose what we do with our time, what we do with our money, what we do with our minds, what we do with our emotions, what we do with this little computer brain that is a human body brain, right? That's full of like addictive tendencies and all this wild stuff, right? Do we know that about ourselves? That lives in this world with all these funky little expressions that we can love and we can hate, all of that. It's like, what do I dedicate that to? What do I get that in line with? What do I yoke that to? That's the practice of bringing together will and understanding. We don't need to engage this practice. I do believe that we have free will. I think we can see it left and right, right? But I think what we're created for is to be gloriously in alignment with the one will, the highest will. Let thy will be done, this or something better, this or something greater. To the best of my ability, this is the direction where I assert myself, where I assert the God-given will I've been gifted in this lifetime. But sweet Spirit, let me not be mistaken. This or something better. When we're doing what we're created for, being what we're created for, we're operating at our best life. That doesn't mean it's the easiest. That doesn't mean it always looks glorious and great. But it means we give up the idea of the cat and mouse chase with God, of the promising, but if I, then will you. And we recognize that we don't want to trample on this glorious life that we've been given. We don't want to trample on the glorious resources, the glorious mind. There's a version of scripture called the Message Bible, and it's kind of just it's like a modern day version of just saying stuff that's in the Bible in regular funky words. And in the Message Bible in Matthew 7, 6 through 11, it says, don't be flip with the sacred. Banter and silliness give no honor to God. Don't reduce holy mysteries to slogans. It goes on to say, don't bargain with God. Be direct. Ask for what you need. This isn't a cat and mouse hide and seek game we're in. If your child asks for bread, do you trick him with sawdust? If he asks for fish, do you scare him with a live snake on his plate? As bad as you are, you wouldn't think of such a thing. You're at least as decent to your own children. So don't think that the God who conceived you in love, don't you think the God who conceived you in love will be even better? Ask, and it shall be given to you. Seek, and ye shall find. Knock, and it shall be opened unto you. If that's the principle, before you even know to ask, it's been given. Before you even lean in to seek, there it is. But I do think that takes a devotional practice, and I think it takes what Charles Fillmore talked about of bringing the will and understanding together. So do we dedicate everything to the divine within us and the divine among us? Do we dedicate our relationships, every one of them, our marriages, our jobs, our parenting, our funds, our work pursuits? Do we build up a life day by day on that devotional practice? Charles Fillmore, on this 10th lesson of will and understanding, said, as your will and understanding agree, you draw automatically upon this invisible force within you, for it has all adaptability of resources. You can draw out of the invisible anything you want. Some may think that these invisible things are not powerful. He goes on to say, if you think you are bound in any way by the circumstances that made you, you restrict the will and do not have the freedom you should have. If you restrict some of the muscles in the body, you will have a constriction or a restriction of something in your consciousness by the thought in your mind of these things. The remedy, realize that the will of God is now being done in you. You are the perfect outlet of an infinite will. You are the perfect outlet of an infinite will. So where do we invest ourselves? He goes on to say, we want a better understanding of fundamental truth and a better understanding of ourselves. We want to know that within every one of us is an innate ability, an executive ability, understanding and power to accomplish anything. Jesus said that nothing should be impossible to us. But in order to make these things possible, we must awaken to the truth of our understanding, and this awakening must be followed by action. Some people let the will, the activity of man, person, human, run away with their understanding. They do not look before they leap. They plunge through their desire to accomplish into situations before they have consulted inner wisdom. If you are going to do a thing, I would advise that you think about it. Take it to the Lord, which Charles Fillmore also talked about as being the law, the divine law. Take it to the principle, take it to the law, recognize the creative faculty, and be sure it was the right thing to do. Be centered. After you get that inner conviction, then go ahead and do it. God does not push you into it, nor does God do it for you, but the way is open. We hold that there is always this fine energy of the mind going out all the time, removing mountains. Jesus said that if we have the faith as a grain of mustard seed, we can remove mountains. He did not mean that you were going to push down the Rocky Mountains and throw them into the sea. But he meant that right within your consciousness, you had the power to remove every obstacle. Right within our consciousness, we have the power to remove every obstacle. He says we are all carrying mountains of opposition which we might drop. Whew. We are all carrying mountains of opposition that we might drop. Can we feel that? Just feel that in a moment of surrender. Is it possible that I am carrying mountains of opposition that I could just drop? He goes on to say, forgetting the things that are behind and stretching forward to the things which are before, I press on toward the goal, unto the prize of the high calling of God. You'll find new energy if you drop from your mind things that are opposing you. Sometimes it is stubbornness within us that is binding us. Do you ever feel that? When you feel like you're not in the flow of life, do you feel a part of your mind that has stubbornness? And can we just breathe into that and give it some space and give it some breath? Just acknowledge it, right? Acknowledge it's a human condition. I have a lot of stubbornness. I have some serious will. And it's a threat to think of taking that away. But can I just send some breath there? Can I just make some space there? He says, you will find that you are so free, and new energy will come to you if you drop from your mind these things that are opposing you. Sometimes we feel like if we drop from our mind the things that are opposing us, we're not going to be on guard. Right? If I drop it from my mind, well, you may have your mind set upon something that you are going to carry through, and you become stubborn and obstinate. Say, I am not going to be stubborn any longer. I'm not going to be stubborn any longer. So can we surrender to this idea of divine will? That God, the grand overall design, is in charge, but not in a traditional way, not in a sense of separation or two conflicting and opposing energies, but in a way that we fully examine and identify the truth that I am here to cast everything into and before the divine, because that is the fabric with which I'm made. Some of you have expressed frustration about what's going on in the world today. Just a couple. Some of you are tired of the words, let's just pray on that. Let's just pray. You've got my prayers, right? Some of you want to believe God's in charge right now. Some of you are not feeling like God's in charge right now, either in your own personal world or in the world around you. John Pavlovitz, who is one of the powerhouse speakers of our time right now, and probably offensive to many, so hold on to your bootstraps. He wrote this piece called Stop Telling Me God is in Control. He said this, there's a similar refrain I hear from the lips of many Christians these days, whatever the subject turns to the growing dumpster fire in DC and the resulting unrest in our nation. Relax, God is in control. These words are designed as a conversation stopper, an ironclad, sanctified mic drop, exempting them from further discussion on the matters at hand and supposedly assuaging all my fears in 4 simple words. The only problem is it's not true, at least not in the way they might like it to be right now. In these days, with so much that is untenable and threatening and worrisome, tossing off a quick "God's got it" is a subtle bit of heresy. It imagines that God engineers election outcomes the same way as football scores. It exonerates people from any culpability for a vote they perhaps now feel was regrettable. It nullifies any concept of personal will by giving God ultimate veto power over us. It excuses inaction in the face of other people's present suffering. In matters of injustice and suffering and evil, it essentially passes the buck to God. But the story of the scriptures is one of this same God granting humanity the power over their choices, giving them the ability to be co-creators in this world by the decisions they make. Though God is all-powerful, God does not exercise that power to coerce us. We are not mindless robots simply performing tasks we are pre-programmed to. We are fully responsible for the stuff we do and say and think. What this means is that saying God is in control while doing little or nothing to alter the planet in any meaningful way is spiritual rebellion. It is a willing abdication of our calling to be makers of peace and agents of goodness and bringers of justice here. It expects that God will clean up whatever horrible mess we make and that our prayers alone will serve as a sole request form. I don't believe that this is true, and it isn't biblical. I don't believe that Jesus spent 3 years employing people to love their neighbors and as themselves, to feed the poor, to protect the vulnerable, to love our enemies, to bind up our wounds of strangers. If God had already written the script and we're all just playing the whole thing out in flesh and blood without getting to improvise and change lines. All this matters because if we are indeed free to choose, God gave us that gift. And we are also responsible for our choices. And these decisions make tangible ripples in the world, then we had better get to work, Christians. And that means far more than thoughts and prayers and platitudes. In the face of injustice, praying for God to move while remaining stationary isn't admirable, it's cowardice. It's looking around at the frightened, hurting, wounded people in our midst and shooting up a quick 911 call to the Almighty and continuing on with our day instead of rolling up our sleeves and getting our hands dirty by stopping other people's bleeding. God is love. God is good. God is powerful. But God is not forceful and God is not magic. God works through the hands and the words of the people who aspire to this love and goodness and choose to exercise the individual power they have been entrusted with right where they're standing. Jesus was not beamed down from heaven. He is incarnated in the flesh and blood of those who believe that other people are worth sacrificing for, that mercy is the greatest gift, and that love is revolutionary. God's spirit of redemption and redemptive power resides in the breathing churches of we who inhabit this place and seek to be a sanctuary for those in pain. And right now, in the ancient words of St. Francis, are still the most dangerous prayer we can ever authentically pray. God, make me an instrument of your peace. Because the truth, Christian friends, is that God is not in control of you. You are in control of you. And God is asking you to be goodness and love in a way that tangibly changes the story we all find ourselves in. God is asking you what you're willing to do to bring healing and cease pain and show compassion. Your move. I share that because it goes into the microcosm of our lives, right, into our own personal lives, and it expresses out and describes what we're going through collectively. The Buddha said, in the end, only 3 things matter: how much you loved, how gently you lived, and how gracefully you let go of things that were not meant for you. Ram Dass said, I was no longer needing to be special because I was no longer caught up in my puny separateness that had to keep proving I was something. I was part of the universe like a tree is, or like grass is, or like water is. And from the words of Confucius, we have 2 lives. The second begins when we realize we only have one. Namaste.